Christoph, I'm really, really curious about your opinion about something. So I recently visited Pushkinsky Dome in St. Petersburg, and I examined all the block cylinders. And there are two different catalogs, which I have now a copy of. One was from Berlin when they were leaving the Berlin, and the other one is what got in Pushkinsky Dome. So in that catalog, there are those, as you know, those 3 cylinders where it claims that Tchaikovsky is playing. And it says that the Tchaikovsky is accompanist. And I wanted to look into that a little bit more because I will probably do something with a computer analysis to see if this is the same pianist. But unfortunately, some cylinders are missing. What is your view? Like, Tchaikovsky also didn't want to be recorded, as we know from. So what is your view? Like, why do we have Tchaikovsky's name in the catalog, but we don't have Rubinstein's name in the catalog? What do you think? I mean, they are of the same status. I mean, it's just, we could compare those 2 instances of 2 really important personas who didn't want to be recorded.
So you surely do know more than I do, but my suspicion is that some of these cylinders and their descriptions are a sort of mystification, because it may be that the famous cylinder where the group of musicians has gathered and is speaking and laughing and joking, that it was recorded not at one evening but at several evenings, maybe. And there in a Russian article, claim is made that you can identify the single voices, but on which is the fundament to say this is the voice of Tchaikovsky, because he is said to have been a baritone voice, and what you can hear is a very high voice. So there are so many uncertainties, and I fear the Russians are slightly reluctant to let us have looks in their cards, to look in their cards, because these are the most prestigious musicians of their music history. And as for Rubinstein, I think it could be that he asked not to be mentioned and to play only as an accompanist. So he would fulfill the wish of all his surroundings, but under these conditions. This is what I'm thinking.
Yes, I find the whole thing, there is a lot of secrecy about things, and it was very, I have to say, challenging to get to Pushkinsky Dome, to get hold of them. But then when I did, people were really helpful and friendly, and I photographed each cylinder, which now we can actually then examine with you know, zoom in and see some things, which is really fantastic. They are missing some. But more importantly, they are really keen to put this forward, to say we do have Tchaikovsky playing, and they do actually have something which I find extremely interesting: Arensky playing an organ, improvising on Bach. And that's one of the most fantastic things which we could actually get our hands on. And because it's an improvisation on Prelude and Fugue, I think it's very valuable. So I will look into that, but it was interesting. Thank you for having an interest in that. This is really great. We have to continue talking about this.
Thank you, Inja. I think I will add in the chat a link to a German language article I wrote about this phenomenon, because in the 5 minutes you gave me, it was impossible to go more into detail.
Yes, thank you very much. Please do, and let's stay in touch.
Okay.
In the meantime, we received some other questions. Naila is saying, thanks to everybody. A question for Ferenc to explain a category of home recordings. Who did them?
Yes, thank you for this question. Maybe I was too short, but I've mentioned the name of István Mokai, who was a Hungarian sound engineer, and he experimented with home sound recordings. He also had a studio where he made copies of commercial recordings for private purposes. He also made copies from phonograph cylinders to 78 RPM discs, for example, for Bartók. And he experimented with recordings from the radio broadcasts. And he was not the only person in Budapest that time who made experiments with that. But these recordings were made by István Makai. That time, if I remember well, he still used a separate studio for that, but later he made this kind of recordings at home, really in his own flat.
Thank you very much. You have another question while you are here from Esther Burgos. You said that the sound recordings are not considered interesting material to study under musicology studies in your country. What about other disciplines apart from you? Is there anyone else studying these materials in Hungary?
It is a hard question. I have mentioned that Hungary, as well as yesterday, Philip Scheer said that we also don't have Hungarian National Sound Archives. The sound recordings were not collected systematically by any Hungarian institutions, mainly the commercial sound recordings. And the early sound recordings, except for the very important cylinder recordings of Hungarian folk music made by Bartók, Kodály and their circle. These are, so the commercial recordings are not part of the knowledge, of the musicological knowledge. And maybe, yes, maybe I am the only person who deals with them within musicological research. The other research fields are more hard. For example, I told to a colleague who's a historian that, oh, do you know that there are some sound recordings with the person of the voice of the person who are dealing with? And he said, okay, it is not so important. But why? It is a almost clear field, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much for this. We have further questions for Joanna. Catherine Moore is saying, I have read speculation that violinists in the early days of recording deliberately emphasize vibrato in order to have a signature sound, because with recordings, their audience could not see them and they wanted their audience to know who was playing. Do you think that portamento and other effects might have been exaggerated for this purpose?
That's a very interesting supposition. I would like to know what's the basis of it. Izai was known also from the written evidence for his vibrato. That was quite a new thing at his time, but also for his portamento and rubato. So I don't think he would change a lot his way of playing just for the recording. He recorded quite in the end of his career. He didn't play as much as at this time. He recorded in a super short time of only 3 days of recordings. And for a long time, he didn't want to record. They just probably convinced him with financial propositions. So I don't know, but I wouldn't think he would exaggerate portamento for that reason.
So Catherine is saying, replying to you, saying Mark Katz in his Capturing Sound book is where I read about this. So yeah, so you don't think that that was the case?
If I understood well, Mark Katz's ideas, it was even opposite, that recordings in a way vanished the expressive portamento, because if we repeat the same portamento, if we hear many times the same portamento, then it becomes less natural. But that's maybe my misunderstanding.
Okay, that's really interesting. And while you're here, I thought that it's really interesting photo you chose. I love that photo. It's really, really great. And it really shows you the conditions, some of the conditions. We can't trust always the photos. I like that there is a curtain and you can't see the machine, which was actually the thing what they were hiding and everything. I have to say, from my own perspective, that going through in my project where we do mechanical recordings, and we did a series of phonograph recordings with wax cylinders, and we are producing records as well. I actually recorded with David Milsom on a violin, and we had to severely change the way we would sit and how we will play. Also, I recorded with a horn player, natural horn player, Jeroen Billier. And again, he had to go through a lot of changes in the way how he would stand, how he will hold his instrument, and where he's going to be positioned. And this is something which is really, really amazing to go through. And you said how uncomfortable he looked and in that photo, and I do agree. I'm sure that it is true. Davis is saying something which I was just about to come to, is that most of these photos are posed. They are not, not real, because people didn't want to reveal how they made it. And a very important photo of that was in the London gramophone studio, where they put some woman to play the piano, which she wasn't anyway, and the piano had the score which was for a piano and the voice, and there was an instrument of bells just next to it. So they just kind of show everything what they have, which is really interesting. So thank you for sharing the photo, and thank you for your insights. I will stop talking because there are people writing. David is saying, I think that the technology can also exaggerate both our perceptions of certain effects, and I think of experience of making recordings, something I'm beginning to do with Inja's encouragement, can affect stylization. There is much work to be done here, looking at our own experiences of making such recordings as another window upon gauging differences and similarities between early recordings and likely possible normal non-recorded practices. It's a much bigger discussion, but I think that we all know that this is something which we want to address. But thank you for doing that in your research. Going through the comments, I didn't see a comment from Mark Bailey to Cla. Fascinating. Looking forward to a full presentation of Le B style when it's ready. Thank you. So when do you think that you will have some kind of first major revelation here to share with us, Cla? How are you getting on? Okay.
Yeah. The thesis is written, but now I'm working toward publication. So
super.
Probably 1-2 years. I don't know.
Yeah. That is great. Well, thank you for that. It looks like a very, again, interesting and super under researched instrument for early recordings. You are very rare. Yeah, there are not many of you in guitar playing. I have met only a couple of people actually.
Yes, I think the guitar has still a lot of potential for research, and there's just by digging through a lot of catalogs of Spanish record industry firms, and there are still many records which are not known, and there's a lack of discography. So there's still a lot to do in this field.
Yeah, but that's good. That's always a show that shows a good research when you are done with your project, and there are so many things to be done after that. So thank you for that. So to continue reading the comments, David is saying, I think those of us who are making acoustic recordings should share ideas and experiences. I do agree. I'm new to doing this myself, but already it has simulated a lot of thinking, which is great. I think that that's a more general comment to everybody. Charles Steps is saying, at the same time, having heard early recordings recreating on a horn, the depth of detail with this mode of reproduction is highly impressive and even at times realistic, much more so that we can appreciate listening on our computers. So yes, is anybody who would like to comment on this? Do you have any experience in listening to the recordings through the original the machinery? Massimo is saying absolutely different. I would agree. It's just all this, the noise, what we hear as a background noise, it's actually in the actual background when we are playing it on a phonographs, and that's so beautiful. I was really surprised by the quality of the recordings when I was listening. So that's a good point there. Paula Rios has a question for Carolina. Carolina, in the near future, when more and more recordings of Spanish pianists of this period are properly analyzed, do you think it would be possible to think of a Spanish pianistic interpretation with rubato, phrasing, rhythm, and so on, considering the strong influence of folk music, song, and dance during the National School and avant-garde? What a good question. So, Carolina.
Hello. Fantastic question, Paula. Really something that I hope to to investigate, and I think there should be some marked elements on that. We shouldn't forget that the Spanish piano playing was built on other European traditions. So most of the Spanish pianists went to other cities like Paris, and they were trained also in Brussels Conservatoire. So they brought all this knowledge to Spain, back to Spain. So there is a lot of mix of that, which is very difficult to probably to separate. So it's going to be a really hard work to do that. But probably there should be some parameters that we could spot.
Yes, and I had a question for you as well while we are waiting for more questions in chat. I think that composers' recordings are extremely underrepresented, the research on composers' recordings. Do you have any other plans of what you will do with Granados and playing his own pieces, the way how he's reading them? Are they much different than what he was writing, like what we have with Debussy? What is your view on that?
On my previous research on Granados, I noticed that the public editions that we have today, they do not transfer the interpretation as he left it in recordings. And of course, this we can think that perhaps that's an assumption is that because he was a great improvisation composer, no? He did great improvisations. So many musicologists believe that he's improvising, when you listen to some of his recordings. But I have studied, it's a wonderful thing. I show you in the presentation this slide. There is all the recordings he made, and you can see that they are the same pieces recorded in different systems, in different years also. So this is wonderful. Then you can see the consistencies. And still, when you see consistencies there, they are not in the published scores. So I particularly studied these differences And then I went to the Academia Marshall in Barcelona. I don't know if you are familiar with that. And I met students of Frank Marshall. Frank Marshall was a student of Granados, and he was a teacher of Alicia de la Rocha. So my main question was, how are these students of Granados performing the music as well? Do they have similar parameters? Do they have similar way of performing? Are they very different? And I also had sessions playing for Albert Ateneye. He's a student of Marshall, a great, incredible pianist. You have to hear his interpretations of Goyescas and Iberia. It's incredibly wonderful performances. He's not so famous, but because he lives in Spain. Anyway, this is another topic. But this is a wonderful what you say, and this is a really interesting point. And I think we should consider recordings much more than we do.
Yeah, thank you.
And by the way, I actually saw your work you are doing with Edison and all this fantastic. And I didn't link it with you actually. I did, you know, for some yes. And now I watched you and I said, oh my God, this is she. You know. So I have many questions for you, and I have many questions for you about this system, because I'm actually very interested to replicate the Albenic performance of 903, and that's a huge work. And you are a big inspiration for me. So I need to ask you lots of things.
That's very kind. Please write to me. You have my email. Write to me, and I would be always happy. And this is really public, you know, shameless the advertising. But whoever would like to play in my project is more than happy. I would be more than happy to host you. So please let's.
So I would love to, definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about that privately. But thank you very much. That's super exciting. Massimo is saying that the same consistency you were talking about, Carolina, is it can be found in many other recordings made from the same interpreters over the years, and I really agree with that. Even if we compare the recordings which are made on completely different systems, like acoustic recordings, electric recording, and piano roll, couldn't be more different. There are still a lot of similarities in expression, even though the tempo is not probably the same, but that is really interesting. Andrew is saying, I would encourage everyone working with historical recordings to try and access the original discs, or failing that, to familiarize themselves with the practices used in the digital transfer. Commercial CD transfers and older vinyl releases are far from reliable as a guide to tempo and speed, timbre, harmonic, balance, and just about everything else. Even flat transfers are potentially problematic, and misleading without knowing something about de-emphasis equalization, a type of EQ that has nothing to do with an aesthetic equalization. And yes, a lot of us agree with Andrew. And Eva is saying, in a way, it's great that so many historical recordings have been digitized in the last few years. We can now access so many more repertoires, but we as researchers sometimes ignore how these digitalizations are made. More conversations are needed between musicologists, performers, curators, archivists, engineers, and technicians. And yes, I would completely agree. Would somebody like to comment on this? Okay, I wrote a an article about the digitizations of the piano rolls, which really similar, with similar problematics like what Sebastian was telling us about. And I examined 9 transfers of piano roll, original piano roll. Some were published in a CD publications, but some were YouTube playings and stuff like that, because we all use YouTube, even we shouldn't so often. It's still being used a lot. And between the 9 digitizations of the same piece, the piece varied in tonality for a fifth. So some pieces would start with a D flat, which was written, and some pieces, so the pianos were so out of tune, so pushed back, that actually they were starting off on like a F sharp, which was completely insane thing to hear, the differences in timbre of such a big scope of piano roll recordings. But also one of the pieces, one of the transfers which was published on a CD was 1 minute shorter than the others. 1 minute for a 6-minute piece. And that's completely something which I knew that I will find some, so I went, you know, with a clean heart in this research, knowing that I will find some irregularities, but 1 minute and a fifth, I really didn't think that I will find something like that. So I think that it's something to have in mind all the time. Esther Burgos is saying, I agree with Eva's last comment, other disciplines must work together. And David Milsom also agrees. I think the variability of new digital transfers is important too. See, for example, a more recent Alan Evans transfer of Joachim when compared with older transfers. Christoph Flam, thank you, Christoph, is saying another problem is the transcription of piano rolls in standard notation. The Scriabin transcriptions by Pavel Lobanov, for example, are far from giving the actual playing. Maybe anybody has experienced similar difficulties. Does anybody want to answer to this? So you don't listen to me. So, because I'm reading the comments. Yes, I did meet with these problems. It's very difficult to transcribe any kind of form of recorded sound in that way. And yes.
May I say something?
Yes, of course, please do.
Yes. I am currently working with the artificial intelligence group in Vienna, and they are working on transcribing acoustic recordings to MIDI file, and that's really something still in the infancy of research. So it's maybe very difficult still to do, and we have to relay a lot of our visualization skills of these recordings and also about our ear. But still, they are working hard on this, so probably in the coming years there will be some tools that doing that, because already I experienced this. Some acoustic recording, I send them and I have a contact with them, and they run this tool that they have at the moment, and they could give some MIDI files. It's still not great, but you can already see a lot. Now, from MIDI to score, now it's a very difficult problem, and many research groups are doing that, but it's very hard. And now they're relying on neural networks and artificial intelligence, so they need a lot of models of the same piece, the same style, so the machine can understand all the deviations and then apply it. So a lot of work to be done still.
Thank you. That is really interesting. Charles Steps is saying, the answer is being able to follow the MIDI file versions on piano roll views, as we have seen today, which gives a really clear graphic representation, which I think there is a lot of nodding going on here. So I think that we all very much agree. I want to ask a question for Joanna. I see Johannes is not with us. I think that he had to leave earlier. But I really want to know something, which is maybe, I'm sure that David will let us know what he thinks about this. This is really a purely naive question, okay? So in piano playing, fingerings is something which is very, very, very much context-based, how you're built, how your hand, do you have a big hand, do you have long fingers?
Mm-hmm.
Is your torso big? How you're going to sit? It's like, basically, it's very physical. So fingerings which work for me, which I have very big hands, we're not going to work for people with smaller hands just because of the physical things. So I always, for instance, personally, make sure that my pupils who have smaller hands than me, that they find the better fingerings for their hand. So now, is this, when you search for fingerings, what Johannes was talking about, what is your view on this? I'm very, very positive over this kind of research, so I'm asking this with a very positive tone, okay? If that fingers were really important for that person's playing because of the way how they were built, how their fingers were. Of course, there are some options in violin which are completely different than the pianistic options, which I don't understand. So that's why, forgive my ignorance. But if you translate the fingerings from somebody else, which are so subjective, how do you apply, how do you know that it really works for you? Maybe it will not.
I'm really confronted to this question because Isai had apparently very long fingers. My hand is quite a standard one. Many people would say that my fingers are long, but apparently Isai was really admired for his big hands. And of course, very often when he annotates in his course the something that could be normally viewed as a change of the position, maybe he did it without changing the position, without the portamento. But what we can hear on the recordings, it's a lot of portamentos. So this is even that he wasn't, thanks to his big hand, he wasn't obliged to do that. It was his artistic choice. So in these cases for portamento, I feel like I can imitate, and this doesn't really matter in a way of the hand. But this is for in this stage of my research, I feel like this portamenti, I can imitate it even with my my hands.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's really interesting. As Mimi Mitchell is saying, as Johannes mentioned, fingers have a double role. From physically playing the notes, small and large hands do things differently, to aesthetic choices of which fingering and which string you use to play the note. Yes, so I was completely aware of that. That's why I was saying that's why I was saying that I'm asking this as a pianist from a different point of view, and then I understand my own limitations of the instrument understanding. So yes, thank you. So we are approaching to the end of our second day, our last day of our conference, and thank you very much for being here with us. We had fantastic time. I think that this conference in these 2 days showed how much is necessary that we meet up and we talk and we share. There is a lot of things to discuss.